James, who turned 18 in December 2025, has only recently begun embracing the attention that comes with his role in the royal family. The freshly graduated teen is the son of Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, the youngest brother of King Charles, and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh.
There are moments in royal history that arrive without fanfare, without the drum roll of media speculation, without the carefully orchestrated press releases and choreographed photo opportunities that have come to define so much of modern palace communication. They arrive instead in the language of quiet action, of deliberate choice of a young man stepping forward not because the spotlight demanded it, but because the time had finally come to honor something far greater than himself. This is one of those moments. James Alexander Philip Theo Mountbatten-Windsor has formally accepted the title of Prince of the United Kingdom. And with that single, voluntary act, the landscape of the British monarchy has shifted in ways that will take years, perhaps decades, to fully understand. Not because of what the title gives him, but because of everything it reveals about who he already was long before he ever bore it. To understand why this matters so profoundly, you have to go back. Not to the headlines, not to the palace announcements, but to the beginning of a story that was being written in private long before the world ever thought to pay attention. James Alexander Philip Theo. 4 names, each one chosen with the precision and intentionality that characterizes everything the Edinburgh family does. But it is that third name, Philip, that holds the weight of an entire philosophy within its 2 syllables. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, was not a man who courted admiration. He was a man who built things. Over more than 7 decades as the consort to Queen Elizabeth II, he constructed the internal architecture of a modern monarchy. Its discipline, its standards, its unflinching commitment to duty over personal comfort. He was, by any honest measure, one of the most consequential figures in 20th century British institutional life. Not because of the power he wielded, but because of the power he chose not to pursue for himself. When Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, placed the name Philip into their son's full title at birth, they were not being sentimental. They were making a declaration. They were announcing, to those wise enough to hear it, that this child carried a covenant, that somewhere in his future there was a duty waiting to be fulfilled. Looking at James Alexander today, 18 years old and now officially a Prince of the United Kingdom, that covenant has been honored in full. Most children born into royal families are shaped by the machinery of the institution from their earliest days. Titles, protocols, and the constant awareness of public scrutiny form the invisible walls of their childhood. The expectation of deference surrounds them like an atmosphere they breathe without ever questioning. Sophie and Edward made a different choice, a radical choice by the standards of the palace, one that raised eyebrows from Buckingham Palace to the farthest corners of the Commonwealth. They decided that their children would not carry princely titles into childhood. James grew up as the Earl of Wessex, a title of genuine nobility, but one that carries none of the automatic reverence attached to the HRH style. He took public transport. He navigated ordinary schools. He waited in the same queues as everyone else and was afforded no special treatment simply by virtue of his bloodline. What this produced is something that cannot be manufactured in a royal communications office or engineered through a carefully managed PR strategy. It produced a young man who understands from genuine personal experience what it means to earn respect rather than inherit it. Every room he walked into as a child, he had to belong there on the basis of his character, his intellect, and his conduct. Not his title. That foundation, built quietly over 18 years, is not merely impressive. It is extraordinary. And it is precisely the foundation that the modern monarchy requires more desperately than at any point in its recent history. Among all the grandchildren of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, James was the one who absorbed the deepest lessons of the old Duke's philosophy. This was not accidental. There is a particular image that those who knew the royal family well during those Balmoral summers still speak about with a quality that borders on reverence. The image of a very old man and a very young boy standing together on the banks of the River Dee, the Highland wind carrying the scent of heather across the water, the two of them standing perfectly still in the way that fly fishing demands. Fly fishing is not a pastime for the impatient. It requires an absolute stillness of body and mind, a capacity to read the environment with complete analytical focus, to understand the current without fighting it, to watch and wait and observe before committing to any action. It is, in many ways, the perfect metaphor for the art of leadership, and Prince Philip understood this with the instinctive wisdom of a man who had spent 7 decades learning when to act and, more importantly, when to remain still. James absorbed everything those afternoons had to teach: the patience, the silence, the analytical observation of the world around him before he committed a single word or gesture. Those qualities are not abstract virtues. They are visible in every public appearance the young man has made. The composure he displayed during the lying-in state of Queen Elizabeth II at Westminster Hall, when he stood guard over his grandmother's coffin at just 14 years old, without a single moment of visible uncertainty or self-consciousness, was not the performance of a child trying to appear older than his years. It was the natural expression of a character that had been shaped, year by year, in those quiet Scottish afternoons beside a cold river. Prince Philip taught James Alexander how to fish. But more than that, and the distinction matters enormously, he taught him how to rule. September 2022. Westminster Hall. The lying-in state of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The grandchildren of the late Queen gathered to stand vigil over her coffin, in one of the most scrutinized royal moments of the 21st century. Tens of millions of people watched across the globe. The emotional pressure in that ancient stone chamber was immense, the weight of history almost physical in its density. Experienced statesmen and women who attended reported feeling overwhelmed by the gravity of it. James Alexander was 14 years old. He stood without fidgeting. He stood without the natural self-consciousness that any ordinary teenager placed in that extraordinary environment would have displayed. He stood with his head bowed and his expression carrying the kind of dignified concentration that speaks not of performance, but of character. He was not pretending to be ready for that moment. He simply was. Because everything in his upbringing, every choice his parents had made, every lesson absorbed beside that Scottish river had been, whether consciously or not, a preparation for exactly this. When those images circulated around the world, something shifted in the conversation about James Alexander among those who were paying close attention. Palace insiders, constitutional scholars, veteran royal correspondents. The question was no longer whether this young man would matter to the institution. The question became just how central he would prove to be. Fast forward to the Edinburgh family's tour of South Africa, James's global debut on the world stage. He attended without the title of Prince, traveling as the Earl of Wessex, the son of the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. The HRH style had not yet been formally accepted, and yet, in every room he entered, in every conversation he had with community leaders and conservation specialists and government officials, the respect he commanded was entirely self-generated. This is Sophie's masterpiece made visible. 20 years of deliberate, patient, principled parenting, producing a young royal who does not need the armor of a title to command the genuine attention and regard of the room. He earned it through the quality of his listening, the intelligence of his questions, and the authentic warmth that no training program can manufacture. What observers noted time and again was the practice of what seasoned diplomats call active listening. James did not position himself at the center of conversations. He stepped back. He placed himself at the periphery. He watched, absorbed, and assessed the full dynamics of every exchange before contributing a single word. When he did speak, it was not with the scripted pleasantries of official diplomacy. It was with specific, considered observations that demonstrated genuine comprehension and genuine care. Conservation specialists who had met dozens of royals came away visibly moved. Local community leaders who had braced themselves for the polite detachment of royal formality found themselves in what felt like real conversations with someone who was genuinely present. Veteran journalists who covered the chore found themselves writing, almost against their professional instincts, not about what James said or did, but about the quality of his presence. That almost impossible to quantify, almost impossible to fake, thing that separates people who are merely impressive from people who are genuinely extraordinary. The departure of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex created consequences that went far beyond the personal and the emotional. It created a structural gap in the working royal family at a moment of serious institutional pressure. The core group of royals carrying the thousands of patronages, overseas tours, and ceremonial duties that constitute the daily operational life of the crown was left with a significant shortfall, not merely of numbers, but of character. The monarchy did not need another name on a letterhead. It needed a young royal who combined genuine public appeal with absolute institutional loyalty. Someone who could be trusted not merely with a charitable patronage or a goodwill visit, but with the long-term strategic integrity of the crown itself. James Alexander is that person. And the almost poetic irony is that the palace found him not by looking outward toward new arrangements or new alliances, but by looking directly at the young man who had been preparing himself for exactly this role, quietly and without fanfare, his entire life. Beyond his character and his diplomatic instincts, James brings something that the monarchy has rarely possessed in any generation: a genuinely scientific mind. His engagement with STEM subjects is not the performative interest of a royal lending his name to a worthy cause. It is a deep, serious, rigorous engagement with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics that equips him to engage with the defining challenges of the age on their own terms. Climate science, ecological systems, defense technology, educational innovation. When James sits in a briefing, he does not require translation. He brings his own analytical framework to the table. This matters more than most people yet realize. The 21st century monarchy must prove its relevance to a public that is increasingly skeptical of hereditary privilege. It must engage credibly with the most pressing issues of the age. And to do that, it needs members who do not merely lend their prestige to complex problems, but who actually understand them. James is that member. The relationship between James Alexander and Prince William, the Prince of Wales, is perhaps the most consequential partnership in the current royal family. The age gap between them, nearly 2 decades, might seem significant. In practice, it is almost ideally calibrated for what the institution needs. James is young enough to defer to William's authority without competition, to genuinely look to the future king as a mentor and a model. But he is mature enough to provide real intellectual partnership, real strategic support, and the kind of absolute discretion that William has not always been able to rely upon from those closest to him. Palace sources describe William as having taken a deeply personal interest in James's development that goes well beyond the formality of senior royal mentoring. In James, the Prince of Wales has found what insiders describe as the loyal royal sibling in spirit that circumstances denied him. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a fulfillment of what that role was always meant to be. Someone who chose loyalty not from obligation or obligation alone, but from genuine conviction about the value of what the crown represents and genuine personal affection for the man who will one day lead it.